Well, based on the forecast of no wind today, I've made my way to Lake Eildon. Hey you! You're watching Robbie Fishing. Now before I start, just a quick disclaimer, the fishing wasn't overly great. It's not a fishless trip as you'll see, but it wasn't great fishing either. But I did have a great afternoon. I had an awesome drive in, an awesome drive home, lots of wildlife, and I got the opportunity to do a bit of creative photography once the full moon came up over the lake. It was a great afternoon, despite the fishing being a little bit on the slow side and the weather forecast being a little bit inaccurate. And I apologise for that little bit of bird poo on the windscreen there. That'll disappear later in the video. Now on the way to Lake Eildon, I decided to take the scenic route over the top of Mount Samaria, where if you look closely you'll see a fallow deer on the road in front of me. Now stay tuned because later in the video on the way home I see lots of wildlife. Now the forecast for here for today was no wind, pretty much no wind, 4 kilometres an hour or something ridiculous. I think it's quite a lot more than that. I've come over here to Ford's Inlet to do a bit of bait fishing, but the wind is a little bit strong, so I'm really glad that I had the foresight to bring a lure rod. I've got my regular soft plastics rod with a soft plastic on it. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to cast some lures around for a little while and see if I can pick up a redfin or something, just while I wait until it gets a little bit later, because I'm hoping the wind dies down a bit then, and then I can throw some bait in. Well, I spent about half an hour casting soft plastics and bladed spinners and I didn't catch any fish. I did have quite a few strikes though. There were a few active fish. I think they might have been very small. So I decided to put my underwater camera in and then set up my bait rods. Well, I've got everything set up and I'm about to go bait fishing. But before I do, I'm going to go and put my underwater camera in. I'll go for a walk out there to probably chest deep, I suppose, and then I'll put the camera in. Now, because of the wind that wasn't forecast, the water's quite murky around the edges. I might go out a little bit further and see if I can just get it in out there a bit further. Get it away from this dirtiness. The water here in Lake Eildon is actually reasonably clear. It's quite a clear lake. Just not when it's windy like this around the edges. The wind sort of just chops up the edges a bit, but hopefully by coming out here, that might help. Right, we're recording. I'm going to drop it here in about 5 feet of water. And I'm going to leave that there. Righto, now I've got 2 lines to put in. I've got a paternoster rig which I'll put on the left. Sorry, a running sinker rig which I'll put on the left and a paternoster rig which I'll put on the right. This is going to be a bit like set line fishing. I'm just going to put my lines in and check them in half an hour. See if I caught a fish. In this wind it's going to be very hard to detect nibbles. I wonder how my set lines are going out here. I'll give them another 15 minutes and then I'll check them. I kid you not, I just saw a nibble on this right on the left. I just looked up to look at it and it bounced backwards and forwards a couple of times really fast. It was a bite. Ha! There it goes. There was a bite, see? It's a fish biting it. How can you tell in this wind? That was definitely a bite. Is there a fish on it? I think there is. I've got a fish. I wonder how long it's been. Oh no, I'm not wrapped around a snag, am I? No, there's a fish on here. Either I've wrapped around a snag or I've got a fish on here. It's so windy I can't tell. Well, there's weight. There's definitely a fish on here. I don't know what it is. It's a reasonable size fish. It's just a silly carpio. I could barely even see the bite. Oh wow. Well, in these forecast 8 km/h winds, I'm on the board. Unbelievable. Old mate over there, he's sitting there and he's I don't actually think he's fishing, I think he's just enjoying the scenery. But when I yelled out, "I'm on the board," he quickly looked in my direction. He wanted to see what all the excitement was about. I'm using a running sinker, but normally I'd clip a split shot on, but this time I've tied a really tiny little sinker on there so that it can't move, because with a split shot, what happens, you come right out here, you give it your greatest heave like that, and the split shot will often slide down the line. So I've tied a little sinker on there to prevent that. Well, that was it for me. The fishing was very slow, or was it slow? I'm not really sure, because every now and again I'd check my bait and the worms would be gone. I suspect the little redfin were nibbling them and I couldn't see the nibbles in the wind because my lines were dancing around too much. But anyway, I caught one carp, lost a few baits, had a couple of strikes on lures, and I then met the guy from the other car that looked over my direction when I was yelling earlier. His name was Nishant, an Indian fella and a landscape photographer just like me, and we got to take some moonrise photos over Lake Eildon together before I drove home. Check out some of these photos that I took. Now, the underwater camera wasn't hugely successful either, due mostly to the fact that the water was so murky near the edge, but a few fish did swim past, starting with this small redfin. And then over the next 20 minutes or half an hour or so, a number of small redfin swam past. Some of them appear to be just swimming around the camera. They disappear to the left, then come back in on the right hand side, then disappear off to the left, then come back in on the right hand side again. I knew that a mud marlin or two wouldn't be very far away. Now a couple of what appear to be small redfin swim past. Bear in mind there are quite a lot of roach in Lake Eildon, so they could be roach, but I think they're redfin. That one was definitely a redfin. School of redfin incoming. Yep, I reckon they're the bait thieves. I kept losing worms and I couldn't see the nibbles in the wind, and I suspect that these little redfin are what I was losing the worms to. It was about 10 minutes or more before the next redfin turned up. And then a good 15 minutes or so before this big fella turned up. He does a full circle of the camera and comes past again in a moment, stirring up the mud as he goes and deteriorating the water quality. After those last couple of big fat mud marlin came past and stirred up all the mud, well, by the time the mud settled it was too dark to see much. So let's now start the trip home, the eventful trip home. Now on the way home I saw quite a lot of wildlife, but I've had to strip the audio from these dashcam videos because I was listening to loud music and I don't want to get a copyright strike. Anyway, it didn't take long before I saw my first kangaroo, before I even left the reserve. And don't worry, pretty soon I'll wash my windscreen. Here comes another kangaroo on the left hand side. Now a really big one on the right hand side. I don't need to point out this one, I'm pretty sure you'll see it. I decided to go home through Mansfield, and even then once I got up into the mountains on the windy roads I still took a dirt road and went home the back way. I love driving through the bush at night time. I've just left Mansfield and guess what? I'm cleaning my windscreen. I've just realised that my windscreen's a little bit grotty and I'm giving it a wash. I didn't even see this big kangaroo just standing on the side of the road on the left hand side. I'm thankful it didn't jump out in front of me. Another big kangaroo on the left. Kangaroos aren't the smartest animals. The camera doesn't really show it, but there's probably 20 or more kangaroos just standing off to the left hand side of the road here, and that's why I'm driving so slowly. Now coming up in a moment you'll see two kangaroos on the left hand side, about 4 or 5 metres back from the side of the road. You've got to look very closely to see them. There they are there, just hopping off to the left. Did you see them? So we've just driven past those two kangaroos and now in front of us there's 3 deer. 2 of them are on the left hand side but one's on the right hand side. There he goes. That's a fallow deer. There was 3 fallow. You can see the ones on the left if you look closely, but they're harder to see than that one. And now we see one of my favourite native Australian animals, the wombat. How awesome are wombats? Here's a couple of wombat facts. Wombats have more than one hole. They don't just dig one hole and live in it, they'll often have a number of holes, and when they poo, they like to poo on top of something, like a beer bottle unfortunately, or rocks, or logs, and their poo isn't a round shape like sheep or deer or anything, it's more of a square shape, and you know why? Well, that's to prevent it rolling off the rock that it poos on. Wombat Facts 101. They really are cool animals. In this clip I spotted a deer in the headlights as I was coming around the bend, so I got my Olight Marauder Mini, which I leave in the door of my car, and shone it down there, and you can just sort of see the deer in the middle of the spotlight running around. That's a Samba deer. He's gone. When I get around the corner here, there's a Samba Spiky in velvet on the road. For those that don't know what that is, a Samba Spiky, or a spiky deer, is a young male deer. We often call them spikies because their antlers haven't grown properly. They're just small spikes, so we call them a spiky. And it's in velvet because when the Samba deer cast their antlers, or their antlers fall off, they grow new antlers and they grow in velvet, and once the antlers have grown, the velvet falls off. That one's still in velvet. Now I'm out of the bush and I'm driving through some farmland on the way home. I should be right to drive a bit faster now. Ah, or should I? That was another Samba deer. Well folks, the fishing was slow, but I had an awesome adventure. I saw heaps of wildlife, I caught a bit of stuff on my underwater camera. I met Nishant, a nice guy. It was just a fun, relaxing afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Thank you all very much for watching.